Um, I've forgotten what the date is. Hold on, I'll tell you in one. Look at this. Isn't technology wonderful? January the 28th. There you are. See, what you could do is look there. Do you see who's on my phone? Can you see my darling boy? There he is, right there. Oops, it's went blank. All right. So, excuse me, everyone. Now then, good morning, good morning. Oh, gosh. Good morning, good morning, good morning. And yes, you can still see I've got the cough, but it's only when I talk. As long as I don't talk, I'm fine. So, all right. So, yes. So this morning it is story time, and I'm going to give you all a little bit of an effort to sign on. I'm going to wait for you all to sign on. In the meantime, for those of you who are already signed in, I'm going to talk to you about my pea soup, of all things to talk about. Oh, yes, I've got my ham and pea soup cooking nicely on the stove. And even though I feel as if I'm boasting and bragging and all that good stuff, my pea soup is excellent. In fact, it is one of my favourite things. My friend Mary Lou gave me an enormous ham bone, lots and lots of meat on it, and so it's been in the freezer for a few weeks now. And I decided it's cold here in Florida. It was 50 something degrees yesterday. That's cold for Florida, and we get so much damp here because of the ocean. We're so close to the ocean that it feels excuse me, it feels even colder. Today it started off at 50 something, but it's warming up to 70 something. But still, at night time especially, there is nothing nicer than ham and pea soup. Yes, yes, made from scratch, no packet stuff here, uh, and um, and some nice warm crusty bread, which I might also make some nice brown crusty bread today that we can have with that pea soup. So I started it going yesterday. It takes hours to cook that ham because we want all the goodness, and we also want all of that fabulous excuse me, jelly that's inside the bone. So we want it nice and soft and cooked through so we can sort of scrape it out. For all of you vegetarians, you must be horrified about with me talking about this stuff. But I love making my ham and pea soup. And I was telling Chris that just this morning, in fact, I said to Chris, did I ever tell you the story of when my ham and pea soup was stolen? So I'll tell you the story. I know, see, it's story time, but I'll tell you the story while everybody's signing in. Yes, I was in Vermont and I made an enormous pot. You know those big giant pots that you might cook lobster or something in? We were having lots of people come for the weekend. It was a long weekend, and there were probably about, I don't know, at least 12 people coming. So I decided, it was cold, it was wintry. I decided, why don't I make ham and pea soup? And it takes a while because, as I say, you have to cook the bone, and it might take a couple of days to get it because I like to do a thorough job. And uh, and so here I am, and I remember it was a Friday night, and the it was probably 12:30, something like that, before I decided I'd go to bed. My ham and pea soup was cooking away very nicely, so I decided to leave it on the stove overnight. As I say, it was cold, it was wintry, and it was still piping hot. So I thought, I'll get up at 6 in the morning and carry on with it. And so there it was, smelling delicious, looking delicious. And I'm thinking to myself, good, when everybody turns up tomorrow, that's what we'll have: ham and pea soup and nice, fresh, warm, home baked, I might add, crusty bread. So I go to bed, don't think any more about it, and I wake up in the morning. And of course, the first thing I do is go to sort of stir the soup, and I take the lid off the soup. And whereas I'd had a full pan, now I'm I don't think it was even a quarter full. Someone stole my pea soup. Someone came in the middle of the night and stole my pea soup. Who would dare to do such a thing? Well, I went into the living room and there were bodies all over the floor, and there were sleeping bags, and people were sleeping on the sofa, and the 4 or 5 people were sleeping on the floor. And I saw my husband's brother was lying on the floor in a sleeping bag, and his 2 sons were. And I'm thinking they weren't supposed to be here until this morning. Well, apparently, what had happened was that they had decided to drive up, and they arrived at the house. They told me at about 2:30, 3 o'clock, and they were so grateful that I'd left them some delicious, wonderful, they told me, very tasty. Make some more for us, Rosemary. They were the thieves who stole my soup. Yes, they'd had a bowl apiece, and they enjoyed it so much that they had another bowl apiece, and I think the boys had another bowl apiece, and left me with no ham and pea soup to feed anyone else. I think I actually probably made another batch. Which isn't easy because you've got to find a ham bone from somewhere, haven't you? But anyway, here we are this morning, and the smell is so good and it's so delicious. And yeah, so I'm making a big batch of ham and pea soup, which I love. It's probably 2 or 3 years since I made it, because we're in Florida, so you know. And Samantha doesn't really have the size of kitchen that we can sort of keep a pot of ham and pea soup on the go for 2 or 3 days. So anyway, there it is. So I hope you all enjoyed that. If not heartwarming, definitely stomach warming story. How are we doing? Now, let's see. Before we begin, let's first of all say good morning to Gregel, who is, as always, standing to my right side. And let's also say good morning to Chris. Are you still in the cupboard, Chris?
I am in the cupboard with wonderful smells.
You know that there's a great story. I don't know if you've ever read it, The Indian in the Cupboard. And so Chris is a bit like the Indian in the cupboard. But anyway, um, excuse me. Let me get rid of that. And then so Chris, do we have anybody logged on yet?
We do. We have Barb and Maggie and Cheryl and Rhonda and Eric and let me scroll back up because we had our early birds on. Marlene from the Northwest, Lorraine. There's still a bunch of people logging on.
Okay, for those of you early birds who logged on early, I'm going to give you a little treat. Let me see. Let me see. Let me see. What could this be? I don't know how well you can see that. Can you see that? I don't know how well you can see it. Yes, it's actually a necklace, and it's got the initial R on it. It actually came from the Middle East. This is a necklace I sometimes wear. Why am I showing you this necklace? I wonder. I'm going to swing it about just a little bit. See. I don't know why I'm showing you this necklace, but can you see that this necklace has a nice sort of pointy end to it, which is the reason why I'm using it or going to be talking about it today. Now, last week on Storytime last week, we talked about John Michaelides, who is that wonderful healer I told you about in Greece. And we talked about him using his divining rods. And for fun, from time to time, I would get my students to go out into the woods when I was in Vermont, and we would find, different sticks and twigs and so on, and I would get them to try divining. We'd go through the woods and we'd check through the woods, and I'd give them a task, see if they could find something, whatever it was that I gave them a task. But they just loved it because even when they didn't find anything, when you're divining, when you're using divining rods, when you're using them properly, when you start to find whatever it is you're looking for, you hold the divining rods, and there are certain types of wood that work better than others. And when you're holding the divining rods, and you sort of leaning them forward and in front of you, but slightly down to the ground, when you're coming across something that you're looking for, you can actually feel, literally, you can feel the pull of the divining rods, sticks, twigs, whatever it is you're using. You can feel the pull of them. You can actually feel them pulling together in this sort of we would call it that universal force, wouldn't we? That energy that sort of is coming through you, um, into the divining rods, coming from the universe, coming from everywhere around us, and you can actually feel the pull. And when diviners, professional diviners, we think of water diviners but there are diviners who look for gold, they look for silver, they look for all sorts of things. And when they are divining, those who are really good at it, they will feel they'll feel the pull, and you can actually pull against the rods, and they'll force you back, they'll push you back. And when they touch or cross and point right down to the ground, that's when they know they've hit whatever it is they're searching for, whether it's water, whether it's metal of some kind, whatever it is. Now, years ago, I read a book called the Power of the Pendulum. In fact, I've read a few books on the pendulum and the power of the pendulum, but I read this particular book, and to my shame, I cannot remember the author. I'd have to go digging through my pile of books to see if I can't imagine that I've thrown it out. And the guy who does this is, I guess, an expert diviner, and he talks about having. Can you see how? See, when I showed you this, wait a minute, wait a minute. When I showed you this, we've got the chain. Some people use string, some people use wool, some people use cotton, but I've got this fine chain here. But apparently, depending on the length of the uh, whatever it is you're using here on your pendulum, um, this guy claims to be able to determine and to dictate what it is you're actually finding, depending on the length. I guess it's sorry, I guess it's how deep or whatever it is the thing is buried. But anyway, I'm not an expert. Sorry, I'm not an expert on pendulums. Let me have a drink. I'm not an expert on pendulums necessarily, but I think there's certainly something in it, and I've had quite a few experiences of the pendulum. So we talked about John Michaelides on last Saturday. That was the story time, and a lot of you enjoyed that story. Then on Thursday, on our Thursday show, which is the Spirit World Sees All, I forgot for a minute what it was called. The Spirit World Sees All. We have lots of people on that show and lots of questions coming at us. And somebody asked me a question about the pendulum and how it worked and so on. I can't exactly remember what the question was now, but I said, maybe next Thursday I'll show you a little bit about how to use a pendulum. I'll give you some help and advice on how to make your own pendulum, because truthfully, making your own pendulum it's a very fun thing to do, and it's something that I teach my students to do, because again, it's about being sensitive, and it's about connecting. It's about raising your level of consciousness to that higher, that higher and intuitive self. I don't want to talk too much about it, because on Thursday I'm going to talk more about it. But I thought that as we're on a kick for the pendulum, and as on Thursday I'm going to be showing you how to use a pendulum, the do's and don'ts of a pendulum. Yes, there are do's and don'ts of the pendulum. So I thought I'd share with you a few of those do's and don'ts of the pendulum, and maybe some of you might like to have a go. It's such a fun thing to do, and people have different results. Some people, it is true, have better luck with a pendulum than other people do. And next Thursday, I'm going to tell you a story of how we had one of my students who, well, that can wait, right? That can wait until Thursday. Anyway, so here we are. So I'm assuming everybody who's signing in is signing in. So I'm going to begin with my story. And as you all know, my story always begins, all good stories begin with once upon a time. So here we go. Once upon a time, I had a client and he was an architect. Um, I remember his name was Martin. I'm not sure if I should tell you why I remember that name, but let's just say there were three Martins on the go. Three Martins who had asked me out. Three Martins who would, let's say, chasing me at the time. Sort of, you know. Anyway, uh, let's not make out that I'm a femme fatale because I don't think that's the case. But here was Martin, the architect, who was very enamored of me and did ask me out on a number of occasions. Anyway, so he was an architect, and he specialized in golf courses and leisure centers, and he specialized in all that sort of thing. And so he was always busy because there's always somebody wanting to build something like that, right? So he was involved at the time in a project. And so I don't remember the reason he came to see me, but I do remember that. He'd come and visit. As I say, he was a little bit enamored, so he'd come and visit with me, and one particular time he called me up and he said, "Rosemary, I'm having a problem with a project. I'm not sure if you'll be able to help me because every time we try to dig, we're at the stage of we're digging out, and this was for a golf course and leisure park. Every time we try to start digging, we keep coming across uh, this mass of rocks here and there that we that we're stumbling over, and we don't seem to be able to find. They were looking to build a specific thing. I don't remember what that was either, but we can't build it on this rock. So I was wondering if you could take a look at it for me in maybe in your way, and maybe you could tell me where the best place to build this thing is. I don't remember what it was, but anyway, so I said, well, sure, I'll have a go. And I'd been into old houses and into mansions, and I'd been into prisons. I'd been into, when I say been into them, sometimes physically, but sometimes going back and down and through the hole my way and traveling either backwards or forwards, but traveling, leaving my body and moving, as I call it, back and down and through the hole, and to see what it is that I can see, or to visit a particular place. I can't always go abroad, but oh well, I can though, can't I? Because I go back and down and through the hole, and I can go anywhere in the world or anywhere out into space. Now that sounds unbelievable, doesn't it? Really, really. Yeah. Am I making this up as I go along? Of course I'm not. Anyway, all right. So as a little aside, I do remember a story about the Hopi Indians, and one of the grandfathers allowed a reporter to come in and interview him. And at the end of the interview, the reporter said to the grandfather, he said, "So what do you feel about man building a machine to go to the moon?" And the grandfather looked at him and he thought for a moment. Then he said to the reporter, he said, "Well, I have a question for you. Why would you build a machine to go to the moon when you can go to the moon any time? Going down and back and through the hole, we can go anywhere in the universe." Anyway, back to my story. All right, so So Martin came along and he brought all of his maps and all of his bits and pieces and all of his papers. But I preferred not to look at those because I wanted to do it my way. Yes, you've got it. I wanted to visit the site. And even though he was sitting there in my little study with me, I was able to go down and back and through the hole, and I was walking the site. And as I was walking the site, now how is this possible? But yet it is. I was saying to him, so uh, as I go along here, just to make sure I'm in the right place, I'm going to describe different things to you, and you just say yes, that's right, or no, it isn't, or what have you. So I went, and you can imagine this is a vast project, and so a lot of land involved, but they'd already started building in some places, and they'd already started preparing other places, but this one particular place where they wanted to put this sort of it was the crux of the whole center. uh, they couldn't build. So I'm walking around and I'm describing what I'm seeing to him, and he's saying yes, that's right. And then I got out a pad and a pen, and I'm uh, sketching stuff, and he says yes, that's right. And well, how did you know we're putting that there, or how did you know that was there? And waved him away. And never mind how I know. Let's just understand for this moment in time. I do know. So anyway, so then I found the problem areas and the rocky parts and so on and so forth. And he said this project was, it's a $1 million project, and we cannot seem to find a way in. Is there any way that you can tell by sort of looking at the land, or by getting a sense where it is that we should build this thing, where it is that we should start to dig? Now, remember, it's a $1 million project, perhaps even more than $1 million project, and whatever I tell him is going to impact him as the architect. People are going to think he's really crazy. Oh, that happens all the time, though, doesn't it? So I was able to say to him, okay, this is this area here, you'll be good. And there's no rocks, no hindrance. You'll be able to start building here, and as you work your way in, then and I give him the whole description of what he, as the architect, needs to draw out for his clients so that they can get on with this project and finish this project. And so off he went. Now you can see that through this story I'm telling you that this is all done. My mind, my body, my connection to the universe. And of course, let's not forget Grey Eagle, who is saying to me, why don't we just go up there and try looking here, and so on and so forth? Because we needed to sort of draw a plan so that Martin, the architect, was able to then show his clients, how we'd come to these conclusions. And so a few weeks later, I get a call from Martin to say, it worked, Rosemary, it worked. Okay. So, yay. He was so excited. They managed to finish the project. And and as they're finishing this project, he called me again and said, I've got something else for you. Would you mind? Now, at this rate, I'm going to be dealing with Martin the architect over and over again, because he obviously thinks I'm his own personal, private, whatever it is, to set him on his plans. So I decided that I was going to show him how he could do it himself, maybe not quite as effectively as me, but that he could do it for himself. And so I showed him how to use the pendulum and talked to him about how uh, powerful the pendulum can be. So Martin the architect, along with young Martin, I did tell you there were three, along with young Martin, and of course Martin the mafia. That's a whole other story. I'm laughing when I'm telling you, but it's true. Anyway, eventually they fade off into the distance, or I fade off into the distance. Anyway, so so showing Martin the architect how to use a pendulum was actually very, very effective. Now, okay, now it was probably around this time also that I was having issues with the banks, and somebody had stolen money, and I had a fabulous, fabulous banker. He bent over backwards to accommodate me and trusted in me uh, to do everything, as I should. And I did do everything as I should. And it does, it pays off to do the right thing, doesn't it? So, yes, you can see there are lots of hidden stories within this story now. But anyway, I'm not going to be sidetracked. So one day, I have an appointment with the banker, and it's an important appointment. And his decision literally could change my life. It could make things much easier for me, or it could make things much harder for me. So I I go into the bank, and I'm a bit nervous because I'm not sure what he's going to tell me. But so, Rosemary, sit down. Do you want some tea? And got me some tea. Got his secretary to get me some tea, and we're sitting there. And he said, "Okay, down to business. You're fine. Do whatever you want. Everything is all sorted out. Everything is settled." I think it took about 5 or 10 minutes for him to tell me that. And I'm sitting there so relieved because, I was so worried about this situation. And he said, he basically just said to me, "I totally trust you. You've never, ever let me down, ever. And so let's move on." So I'm sitting there having my tea, and he asked me, "So what have you been up to?" And I tell him a little bit about the healing centers, and he knows about them anyway, but I'm telling him I'm teaching. And it happened that the class the week before was teaching my students about the pendulum. And he sits up and he looks at me. He says, "You do the pendulum? You know how to do the pendulum?" And I say, "Yes." And he said, "Well, I'm the president of," and I don't know what they called the organization, but it was, let's say, to simplify things, it was the Pendulum organization. All of these people who were dowsers and fascinated by the pendulum and the power of the pendulum and all of that stuff. And they had this organization that he was a member of, and in fact that year president of. So I said, "You're kidding me. I didn't know that you were interested in this sort of thing." He's "Oh, yes, yes, yes." And he reaches into his desk drawer. He said, "Let me show you something." He reaches into his desk drawer. You never know who you're talking to, do you? You never know what's going to come your way if you're open to things. So he opens his desk drawer, and he pulls out what looks like a map. So he opens it up for me, and he says, "Look," he says, "we're trying to find old Roman ruins. We know that, that there's certain treasures, sort of certain artifacts. We know that there's a possibility that they're in this area. So we've been trying to work on figuring out." He said, different people have tried using the pendulum. And he said, "Every time we think we've found where we need to be, we dig, and then then we come up empty." So I look at the map and I say, "Oh, look at that." And I get fascinated. And he's sort of looking at me, "Rosemary, what are you seeing? What are you seeing?" And so, so I say, "Well," and I start to hone in on exactly where the treasure is. Yes. Not wealthy treasure necessarily, but Roman artifacts. And there are a lot of them in England, because the Romans invaded England in whatever year that was. All right. So now out of his desk drawer, he pulls out 2 or 3 pendulums. And he says, "These are my pendulums." He says, "I've tried every one of them." He hands one to me, and he says, Do you want to use one of my pendulums?" Now, here is a no for all of you who use a pendulum. You may not know this, or you may well know this, or you want to use a pendulum, or you're fascinated, or you'd like to try something like this. Now, you can share your pendulum with other people if you'd like to, but I never share my pendulum because my pendulum retains my energy, it holds my energy, and I don't want anybody else's energy interfering with mine. So keep your pendulum to yourself. If somebody wants to try the pendulum, tell them to go make their own, or to use something that they already have, which is, again, I'm going to show you, this is my pendulum. See how it swings? Oh, yes. Oh, yes. We're going to have fun on Thursday, aren't we? Thursday morning. I'm going to show you how to do it. Yes, I am. And do you remember, the old wives' tales, thread a needle and have it on a piece of cotton and hold it over a pregnant woman. And you can tell if it swings one way, you can tell it's a boy, and if it swings the other way, you can tell it's a girl. Now, it's actually true. You can, if you have a certain kind of energy, if you're good at the pendulum. And I'm going to tell a story on Thursday again about one of my students who was really quite expert without even realizing that she was. She just had that type of energy. Yes, I'll tell you the story on Thursday. I know it's story time, but I'm going to tell you the story on Thursday when we talk about all of this stuff. Anyway, and so, the old wives' tale, as they call it, was if you hold a needle on thread over a lady's stomach, if it turns this way, it's a boy, and if it turns that way, it's a girl, which I don't know, whichever way is the person holding the pendulum who, who makes that decision. But anyway, it actually it works. It's not such an old wives' tale. It's an old wives' true way of using the power of the universe, using the power of the pendulum, probably without even realizing what they're doing. But yes, it's true. You can do it, and you can tell. Yes, of course. Now we don't need it, do we? Because we've got all the fancy machines that tell us. But anyway, back to my banker. So back to this story. All right. So now uh, he he gives me one of his pendulums and he says, "Do you want to use that?" And I say, "Well, actually, thank you, but I don't need it." Because my pendulum is in my energy. My pendulum is in the power of this raising your level of consciousness, being able to see beyond, being able to tune in. So I take the map, and we're both leaning over the map on this desk. And I guess, of course, I have help, don't I? So Grey Eagle is there, and we're poring over this. And this is an exciting thing because, maybe I'm going to see some Roman treasure buried in this on this map in this particular area. And sure enough, yes. Give me a minute. Hold on a minute. Oh, yeah, there, right there. And I point to this particular spot. And he gets a pen and he circles it around the area that I've pointed. And then I say to him, "Okay, now you try your pendulum in on that place and see what happens." So even though he's the expert, he's the president of the pendulum club or whatever that is, I give him some little pointers and I help him to become more in tune and more attuned to his pendulum and to the spot where he's got, and he gets all excited because his pendulum starts to move in the way that it should, and he's so excited. And he goes back apparently to his organization, and sure enough, they go to the area which they have now pinpointed. Or did I pinpoint it? Doesn't really matter, does it? But anyway, and yes, they find some Roman artifacts, and when they spread out and they go further out and so on, they start to dig a little more, and they find some very interesting coins and one or two bits and pieces, and they are thrilled. The society is thrilled. The power of the pendulum, does it work? Without a doubt. Dowsing, does it work? Absolutely, without a doubt. Does it matter as to who uses the pendulum or the dowsing rods or whatever you're using? Yes, I think it does, because some of us are more sensitive and more aware than others. But I believe, as I've shown my students over the year, I believe that we can all learn, and you know what they say, practice makes perfect. And So I like to take my students out and about. I like to take them to be able to show them how they can use these tools. And let's face it, there are many of them. But the power of the pendulum is fun because you can actually see almost immediately. You can see it working, and you can see it working as it should. And does the power of the pendulum mean anything? Does the pendulum have power? No. This little thing here, I'll give you this. More on Thursday. This little thing here does not have the power. It's not this that has the power. It's the person holding it. It's the universal energy that we tap into. It is the openness, the raising the level of our consciousness. It helps us to tune in, and sure enough, our energy travels through this, travels all the way down here. So it's um, if you are more in tune or more able or more sensitive, uh, definitely you can use the pendulum with success. If you think it's all a load of bunkum and you're not at all sensitive and you don't know how to tune in and you're not going to do it anyway, it may still work. You may still be surprised, but the more sensitive you become and the more you tune yourself into the power of the pendulum, as my lovely banker did, and as my lovely architect, Martin the architect, we called him. Well, actually, I didn't call him that. My friends who knew all about the three Martins, if ever I mention Martin, oh, was it young Martin? Is it Martin the architect or is it Martin the mafia? One day I might tell you the story of Martin the mafia because it's a really good story. Anyway, my life has twists and turns, as all of us, all of our lives do. You can actually use the pendulum in lots of different ways and for lots of different reasons, not necessarily to find a treasure, although that if that's your thing and you want to find treasure, yes, it can find all sorts. We'll talk more about it on Thursday. Why would I give it all away on Saturday? Anyway, that's my story for today. I hope you enjoyed it. Do you have lots of questions? Because as always, as soon as you stop asking questions, we stop the show. So I'm looking forward to hearing your comments and I'm looking forward to hearing some of your questions. My show on Thursday, for those of you who want to tune in, or if you can't tune in, you can always, it's there. You can sort of you won't see it live, but you can see it recorded. Just go to YouTube and you can find it. So get ready for it because that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be doing the power of the pendulum, talking about it, and so on. That is the end of my story. So therefore, the end. All right, Chris, over to you.
First comment is from Maggie. I was always told to have a great respect for using tools like pendulums and divining rods and not to misuse them.
Well, good. And by the way, Maggie, I did get your email today, and good you. Well done, you. And we're right behind you every step of the way. And I love, love, love your attitude. While I'm on the subject, we also had an email from Barb. I don't know if she's on the show today, but Barb is suggesting that we end our shows with a little prayer, and I think it's a great idea. Rather than end in prayer, because not everybody prays, and but reminding us about the power of prayer. We're talking about the power of the pendulum, but reminding ourselves about the power of the pendulum, power of prayer. I think, Bob, I think that's such a great idea. And so, if I forget on a show, would you remind me? See, I'm passing I'm passing the responsibility to you. Is that fair of me? Of course, it's fair of me. I think it's such a good idea. So, reminding if we can on any show that we ever do the power of prayer and how collective prayer really, really can make a huge difference. Okay, keep going, Chris.
Marisol says, I think it's very interesting. I am is saying men seem to be open to using a pendulum even if they are not open to woo-woo subjects? If so, is it because they find measuring second nature?
I don't, Marisol, I haven't had the experience that you've had. I find men and women of all ages love to play with the pendulum. Maybe it's a toy that, you know, I don't feel that, well, I don't know. I don't feel that men are more interested in the pendulum than women, and I don't, well, I don't know. Let's suppose you're right. They have a toy to play with, don't they? And it is true that most men like their toys to play with. All boys like to play. I can tell I can tell you that from experience because my grandson loves to play. All right, keep going, Chris.
Marty is simply saying thank you. Annika says, I have used my pendulum to read the level of energy in the chakras of a person when doing healing.
All right, interesting. You can use it for all sorts of things. Keep going, Chris.
Maggie says, while listening to you talking about the pendulum, my whole scalp started to tingle. Who was it, and are they telling me anything?
Well, maybe somebody's saying to you, maybe you'd like to play and use the pendulum too.
When you first took out your necklace slash pendulum, Cheryl said, she's trying to hypnotize us.
Ah, oh well, no. Never thought about it. I wonder if I could. Ooh, why would I? Keep going, Chris.
Maggie says, my grandpa would be called to divine water for wells. And Cheryl says, my mom used to find water that way.
Yeah. Well, again, it's a fascinating subject, and it's one that you don't hear too many people talking about these days. I think, there are so many machines that can supposedly do the work, but I think the natural way, which is the pendulum, the natural way is to sort of, it's so much more fun is to divine and to check. As I say, the book that I read, uh, this particular guy who wrote the book indicated that if the string or the cotton or whatever it was you were using, if it was so many inches, you got tin, and if you got so many inches, you got bronze or something, whatever. And he definitely had tried this out again and again and again. And I've never actually tried using different lengths, um, but what he had to say was really, it was an interesting book. I'm going to see if I can find it out for you guys and let you know what it's called. It was in fact called The Power of the Pendulum. I do know that, but I can't remember who wrote it.
The Power of the Pendulum is by T.C. Lethbridge.
That's it. Oh, why didn't I remember that? Lethbridge, that's right. The Power of the Pendulum by Lethbridge. He has lots to say about it, and it's fascinating. And also, unlike so many of these things, it's so easy to read too. Oh, I found it easy to read. Okay, keep going, Chris. And
Uh,
his name is Thomas Lethbridge. You see how it all comes flooding in there. His name is Thomas Lethbridge, and he wrote this fantastic book. I think he's written more than one, actually.
Eric saying, yes, please show us how to use the sticks or rods.
Well, I can't show you how to use the sticks or the rods, my darling, because I'd have to be outside showing you how to do that. But I can show you about the pendulum. Let's not go too far too soon. Maybe we could have an outdoor show one time, and I'll show you how to have a go at divining.
Ward's was made two comments back to back when you first started your story. Wondering, were you making an energetic field? And the other comment, it needs to touch the hearth.
Okay, not quite sure what you mean by that. So you've got to be in. I like where this is going, but I'm not quite sure what you mean.
Rhonda says, I have a gold aspen leaf. Oh, hold on once. Just scroll down. Give me 1 second again. I apologize. I have a gold aspen leaf that a wonderful friend gave me. It had a pointed tip. Would that make a good pendulum?
Yes, it depends how heavy it is. You don't need anything too heavy. You can make your own. People make their own out of cork or wood or what have you. I mean, each person uh, has to have a feel for what they're doing, and if it feels right to them. Once you thread it, it's got to feel right. So it doesn't have to be too heavy. It doesn't have to be too light. So I'm not quite sure, uh, but about the leaf, but try it out and see. But sort of join us on Thursday, and I'll show you how to do this, and then you can try it out. And if you're finding that it's not moving, or it could be that it's either too light, or it could be that it's too heavy, or if it's a gold leaf, it's not going to be too heavy, is it? Because gold is light. But this I'm trying to think. This thing here, um, it was just, and it sounds a little bit like what you had. The front is it's actually 24 karat gold, but it was very fine, and you could literally bend it. 24 karat is very soft, very very soft. So I had it backed. The guy who, so that's a heavier gold. So I had it. Uh, he carved out this piece here, which is I think it's 18 karat gold, and then he soldered the that onto it. So it's heavier than it might be, but it's not still not too heavy. And if you look, if you can, it swings nicely, right? It swings very very nicely. Anyway, I want to tell you all about it, Tony. Now, don't do this and do that as I'm talking about it to you, but no, because that's for Thursday, isn't it? You've had your story time, so there we are. Right, keep going, Chris.
Maggie says, if using divining rods and pendulum is it a skill inherited or can anyone do it?
Well, I think some people, as I said in the story, some people are able to connect easier than others. And on Thursday, even though it's not story time on Thursday, I am going to tell you a story about one of my students and an experiment that we tried. So I'll tell you that. I'll tell you that story on Thursday. So we're going to have a story time on Thursday, whether we like it or not, because I'm going to talk about the pendulum, and some people are better at it than others. There's no doubt whatsoever about that. But some people are able to tune in and are more sensitive to certain things than other people are. And so it depends on your sensitivity. It depends on the area of your sensitivity. Depends on lots of things.
Dean says, last week I decided to use my dowsing rods to find an item missing for years. The rods led me right to the stuff.
Oh, Dean. How exciting. Well, I have to tell you all that Dean uh, is a student of mine, and if I recall, I think, Dean, you did have quite a bit of success with your pendulum when we did that in class. So, I like the idea. Are you going to tell us what it is you found, and how you found it? That's interesting. Keep going.
Annika says, I have also made pendulums with semi precious stones,
Yeah,
little pearls, and silver.
yeah, you
Your
can.
story is making me think to make some more of them.
Well, you can go to the shop and you can buy. Go to a one of those shops that sell everything mystic and so on, crystals and so on and so forth. You'll see you can buy a pendulum that is ready made. But I have found that the best pendulums that you can use are the ones you make yourself, because they have some meaning to you. And as you're making them, you're putting your energy into them. So as we know, jewelry holds energy, can hold energy for decades and decades. You can take a piece of jewelry and literally uh, connect with the energy of someone who wore that piece of jewelry 20, 30 years ago. So making your own, I think, I would always advise my students to make their own because it's so much more fun anyway. And when you buy pendulums in the store, they don't have any magic to them. You might think that they do, but it's the magic within you that you're using, not the pendulum itself.
Jenny's asking, when a person prays, how specific should we be in our words?
Um, you don't need to be specific at all. Uh, Dear God, help me works for me because I know that He knows what I'm asking for, um, or He knows what I'm asking help with. Um, if you're in a situation, for instance, that you don't know what to do about it, you're confused about it, and you've seen everything you try to do is muddled. Um, what I like to do is to hand it over. So I'm a great one for handing over to God. Here's the thing about handing over to God. Dear God, I can't manage this situation myself, so over to you. But the difficult part is then you can't interfere. You can't do anything to change anything because you have to trust in God and in God's plan. I usually find that that works, but it has to be something very specific or something that I'm really desperate about or frustrated about when I hand over to God because I know I'm an interfering so and so. When you hand it over to God, you've got to cut yourself off and not do anything or say anything and just be and trust in God and trust in the process. Um, I remember years ago I had a whole bunch of students, and the class was getting too big, and I knew that I had to trim it back. And so I'm in my mind, I'm thinking to myself, well, this one can go and that one can go, but I like to keep this one and this one. Sort of trying to decide which of the students I was going to keep and take further, and which I felt, were not for whatever reason, not in my let's say in my area of maybe I was not a good teacher for them, whatever. And so I'm thinking about doing this, and then all of a sudden, uh, my students started dropping like flies all on their own. Someone would come and say, Rosemary, I can't come to class anymore because my husband's got a new job and we're having to move south or north or whatever. And then somebody else would come and say, I can't come anymore because I'm, pregnant and don't have time to do this anymore. Somebody else would come and say, I've changed jobs and I'm having to work the nights, the classes, and so on. And people kept coming, and before I knew it, my class was of a perfect size. But the thing was that the students who were leaving were some of them were students that I would have kept. So I'm talking to Greg, I'm saying, what is going on? And he starts to laugh at me and he says, Rosemary, I am the gardener and I will do the weeding. In other words, I was told he's much better at it than I am. He knows what he's doing. So when you hand over to God, you have to accept God knows better about what he's doing than you do. So leave it to him. So if there's a situation that you're desperate with, leave it to him. But a prayer is simply a thought or a word or something and sort of sent heavenward to God or out into the universe, whatever that prayer might be. So it doesn't have to, you don't have to read out a long litany. If you want to and it makes you feel better, by all means, but God knows what you're doing. He knows what's up. So, can you help me with this situation, please? Is all you need to say. But if it makes you feel better, by all means, do all that intoning and all of that if it makes you feel better. But God knows.
Maggie says, I have a citrine stone with a point. Will this work?
Again, I can't see it. I can't hold it. I don't know, but I have a feeling it might. But it has to be a certain weight. You can't have something that is so light that it floats about, and it's got to be of a certain weight, not heavy, but of a certain weight, so that the pendulum will work. We shall talk about it on Thursday morning.
Last question in the chats or comment in the chats. Dean says, my items were from my son-in-law's uncle, the last survivor of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And you might have heard the song of the Edmund Fitzgerald by Gordon Lightfoot.
No, are you going to sing it to me, Dean? I don't know, but we'll check it
Oh,
out
it's a
later.
great song.
Is it?
Oh, yeah. And Rosemary, since we're almost coming to time, Barbara had reminded us about sending healing, so this might be a good time. It's the end of the show.
Well, I've already mentioned it, sort of healing and healing prayers and so on and so forth. We are going to be doing more shows, sort of healing hands, the Healing Hands Around the World show. We will be doing much more of that. And so I think I did like your suggestion, Barb, that we should talk about prayer and the power of prayer. Now, whether the power of prayer is to do with healing, or whether it's the power of prayer to heal a particular person, or whether it's the power of prayer to heal the world, or um, it depends. And prayer works, and collective prayer works. But prayer doesn't have to be about healing. Prayer can be about, pretty much anything, and anything that concerns you, or anything that you need to know about. Um, so yeah. So for those of you who are interested in healing, again, we are going to be. Now I'm back and from New York, and now we're sort of starting to get back on our feet a little bit. We are going to be doing more uh, healing, and we are going to do more shows with the Healing Hands Around the World. So please join in with that. Uh, it is important, I think. My personal feeling is that everyone should have healing every single day. You can give yourself healing, of course, which is fine. You can ask God to give you healing. You can ask your angels to give you healing, and that's fine, and that works really, really well. But we will, Bob. Don't worry. We will be doing more healing hands, so you can join in with us then. But again, I do like the suggestion of talking about prayer at some point in the show to just remind people you're not on your own. For all of you out there who feel that you're on your own, and sometimes you can be in a crowd, you can be in a family of 10 or 12, and you can feel completely alone. Um, and just to remind us all, we're never alone. There's always someone watching. There's always someone watching over us. There are always our angels watching over us. And on that note, um,
A
just to remind
reminder.
you, just to remind you, on the 4th, which is next Saturday in the afternoon, I am doing a webinar. If you want to know more about it, please go to my website. You'll love it. My website tells you all sorts of things. So please go to my website, rosemaryaltea.com, or email rosemary@rosemaryaltea.com. Excuse me, and ask for more information. We'll be doing that on Saturday in the afternoon. I'm not quite sure what time it is yet. We'll probably be doing something on Saturday morning as well. So we may be doing a Saturday morning show as well. It depends what time the event is in the afternoon. So please join us then. And in the meantime, uh, join us on Wednesday. Gosh, join us on Thursday, please. Join us on next Thursday for our uh, The Spirit World Sees All, as we know it does. I'd like to thank all of you for joining me this morning. I hope you enjoyed the story. It certainly got a few questions going, didn't it? And I hope you'll join me on Thursday at 11 a.m. If not, you can always access it if you're working, you can always access it on YouTube anytime. So you can get the information that way. Um, Let me see. I'd like to say thank you to Chris. Of course, I'd like to say thank you to Grey Eagle. Thank you again, everyone, for watching. I really appreciate it. Until I see you again, please, please, please have a very, very blessed rest of the day, everybody, and have a very blessed weekend. Bye bye.